name's David Church. I'm the General Counsel to the Utah League of Cities and Towns. When I do a presentation, I don't use a PowerPoint, so you won't be distracted by me not being able to manipulate the machinery. And you can feel free to raise your hand at any time and ask any question that you think is appropriate to the subject at hand, and I'll answer it. It's not going to throw it off. You don't have to wait to the end. The more questions, the better. I know lots of you have questions, and I would really appreciate it if you do have them, that you ask them. Every time after I finish one of these, 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 people come up to me and then say, well, I wanted to ask this, but I didn't want to ask it in front of everybody else. That takes all the fun out of it. Okay, first let's talk just generally about the Open and Public Meetings Act. We all know what it is now. At least we should, but maybe there's one person here that's new, that just got appointed last week, that just got elected. We'll start from scratch for them. The Open and Public Meetings Act is a state law that is written by and passed by the state legislature that is intended to apply to all public bodies in the state. It applies, there isn't a separate Open and Public Meetings Act for towns or counties. There isn't a separate Open and Public Meetings Act for the legislature. It's the same act for everybody. And the act, interestingly enough, has a policy statement that is very clear and straightforward. That policy statement says this. It says that it is the intent of the legislature that the state and its political subdivisions exist to aid in the conduct of the people's business, and that they are to take their actions openly and their deliberations are to be conducted openly. Very straightforward, very clear. It's the intent of the legislature that we deliberate openly and we take our actions openly. Let me just say, this is so important to the legislature that they put it right at the start of the act. They even put in the act that there's the potential for criminal penalties if we violate the act. It's so important to the legislature that they don't bother to apply it to themselves. In 2015, I was looking at a newspaper articles yesterday about the legislative session, and then got passed in the back of the legislative session. And you remember in 2015 when the big issue in the state was Medicaid expansion, you know, the Obamacare, and the legislature's considering it. There's a quote in the newspaper on the health care debate of 2015 from our Speaker Hughes. He said, he's quoted as saying, the Draper Republican, meaning the Speaker, said a private discussion was merited given the plan's potentially wide-ranging effect for years to come. We can't do this in a fish tank, Hughes said, highlighting concerns that public scrutiny might hamper an honest and open debate. In 2017, when they're talking about tax reform, the newspaper article says, tax reform, the most debated issue at the 2017 legislature, never even had a public hearing after closed-door negotiations among Republicans failed to produce an agreement on a plan that included restoring the sales tax on food. Their work was largely carried out behind the scenes and debated in closed-door House and Senate Republican caucus meetings. Democrats were briefed on the proposal but did not participate in the discussions. That's the unfairness of the world in which we live. We're subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act, and we're required to deliberate and debate openly. We're not given the same opportunities that the legislature has given themselves, that when we have tough issues or difficult discussions, to deliberate and debate in closed session. We don't get to take closed straw polls on the tough issues and decide whether or not we're going to bring it forward for a final vote. We don't get to hold a closed discussion and avoid, as Speaker Hughes says, the fish tank. They can't do it in a fish tank. We're expected to. So let me tell you why and how it works and how it applies. First, the The policy and purpose is that our decisions and our deliberations have to be taken openly. It applies to every public body, and it applies to every meeting of a public body. The first thing you need to understand is, what is a public body? Public body is defined in the Act to be any body that's been officially created by some official action like an ordinance, a constitution, the legislature, that consists of two or more persons, that has the power, that's supported by public funds, and has been given even a little bit of power, that has the power to make a public decision or give advice on a public decision. So clearly, all of our city and town councils are public bodies. They're created by statute. They have more than two or more people. Clearly, all of our planning commissions are public bodies. They're created by your local ordinance. They consist of two or more persons. Although, interestingly, in theory, you could have a planning commission of one person. The statute says on planning commissions, this drives the planners nuts, by the way, when I suggest this. It's my goal in life before I quit to create one of these. The statute says we can designate the number of our planning commissioners by ordinance. I just want somebody sometime to say, our planning commission consists of one member. That way we'd never have to hold a public meeting and we'd get our decisions done quicker. But no one's taken me up on that yet. But clearly those are public bodies. If you create a committee officially, a commission, an advisory panel, and you officially create it by resolution or ordinance, and you support it with public funds, and you give them some level of authority, it is a public body and will be subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act. So those of you who have standing historic committees, if you have a cemetery advisory committee, if you have the golf course advisory committee, the town days committee, and it's official, it was created by some ordinance or resolution, and you give them some power to make a decision and you support them with public money, they have to comply with the Open and Public Meetings Act. Now, the reason why the legislature gets to deliberate and decide the way they do is they have defined in the act that public body does not include a political caucus. So at the legislative level, they've just said, everybody's a public body except when we meet as a political caucus, and then we're not a public body and we can do it in private if we want. There's no opportunity for those of you in this room to do it that way. I don't think there's a city in the state anymore that runs a partisan political election, although still in state law, unless they've taken it out this year, was the option for cities of less than the second class to run partisan elections. But the last city I knew that did that was Ephraim, and I think they gave that up long ago. But you don't have political caucuses. You can't just divide and say, we're going into caucus, we're going into the political party caucus, we're going to decide what we're going to do, then come out. Nor do I think you should. I think it's good public policy to deliberate and debate in public. I think the public ought to know, for example, on the 2017 tax reform, which legislators were in favor of taking the sales tax off food, which legislators were in favor of putting the sales tax back on food. They didn't think that was important for us to know. They wanted to know, do we have a majority? If we have a majority, we'll bring it out and vote on it. If we can't decide amongst ourselves, we won't bring it out and vote. Okay, we know what a public body then is. The next question is, yes, his question is, we have a closed session when we're considering certain contracts, how does that fit? I'll talk about that in a minute, but let me just say there is the possibility of closed sessions. I'm worried when you say certain contracts. It depends on the subject matter of it, but if I don't cover it, remind me when we get there. The next question we always need to answer once we know what a public body is the definition of meeting. This is where people get into trouble and where there can be some conflict and controversy. How do we know when we're meeting? Meeting is defined as the convening of the public body. Somebody has called it together by somebody who has the authority to convene it for the purposes for which the public body has been created and in which a quorum is present. There is not a meeting unless you're convened for your purpose and a quorum is present. Now, all the time I get the question, well, was it a meeting of Ephraim City Council or whatever city council or the North Salt Lake City Council when we came to the League of Cities and Towns Convention? I see a quorum of the North Salt Lake City Council present here. Is it their meeting? My answer to that is no. They weren't convened as the North Salt Lake City Council. It's the meeting of the Utah League of Cities and Towns. There may be 3 members of the North Salt Lake City Council here present. It may be a quorum of the North Salt Lake City Council, but they weren't convened to meet here as the North Salt Lake City Council. It's somebody else's meeting. So if you're convened, if there's a quorum, it could be a meeting. What is a quorum? A quorum is defined in the state statute as a majority of the governing body unless there's a statute or rule that defines it otherwise. Your quorum for your city and town councils is defined by state law. Your quorum, if you're in a city that has under the 6-member form of government, mayor and 5 council members, your quorum is 3 council members. Your mayor and 2 is not a quorum. 3 council members without the mayor is a quorum. If you're in a town that has or Harriman City that has the 5-member council form of government, you've got a mayor and 4 council members, your quorum is any of those 3. The mayor and 2 is a quorum. 3 council members without the mayor is a quorum. Any 3 in the 5-member council form is a quorum. Some of the larger cities have the 7-member council form of government. The quorum in that is 4. If you've got 4, you're in a quorum, you could be in a meeting. Any questions about what a meeting is and quorum for you? For your planning commissions, your quorum is going to be established either by your ordinance that creates it or your rules of procedure, or if there is none, it's a majority of your planning commission. Yes, sir. His question was on a board, does the chair count towards the quorum and can he vote? If the board has been created by some ordinance or statute and it defines quorum, then you would look to that definition. If there is no definition, then it is a majority of the members of the public body, which would include counting the chairman. Whether the chairman can vote or not vote depends on your rules of procedure for your particular board that have either set by statute or adopted. So the simple example is, of course, in a city with a 6-member form of government, the mayor votes only in cases of a tie and on issues of whether or not to take away the mayor's power or give it back to him and on hiring and firing the city manager. In a 5-member council form of government, the mayor votes on every issue. In the mayor council form of government, the strong form that Salt Lake has, the mayor doesn't sit as a member of the council. The mayor doesn't have a vote on the council. The mayor has a veto. So it depends. The mayor's role, the mayor's vote depends on how you're set up, but the mayor's participation, or the chair is definitely a member of the public body, and without an other statute saying so, would count towards the quorum because a majority of the board is the quorum by default. Any other questions on quorum? Yes. Her question is 3 city council members at a non-city function social gathering and they begin to speak about the city topic. Excellent question. One of the exceptions to the meeting definition is chance get-togethers or purely social occasions. Those are defined out of being a meeting. So a purely social occasion where you're all there, you know, and which city are you from? Millville. They're all in the same Relief Society presidency. You can't get a man to run for office in Millville anymore. She's been very kind about that. And it's, you know, there's only one ward interested in local government. it is not a meeting if you just get together for some other purpose or some social occasion or something like that. But if you then take the opportunity to start talking about city business, you're on the slippery slope. You're on dangerous ground, because the purpose and the intent of the legislation is that we take our decisions openly and we deliberate openly. If you find yourself deliberating, you're close to cheating. You're caucusing, like the Republicans do to make tough decisions. You're just caucusing in a better location when you do it at the Christmas dinner. Any other questions? Yes. Okay, email. Can you convene via email? Electronic meetings are possible under the Act. So it is, in theory, possible to be convened in a meeting even if none of you are in the same room. It is also possible to deliberate and decide via email. So it is possible to cheat via email. But I cannot say that you emailing all members of the council with your position violates the Open and Public Meetings Act, because it doesn't. The statute specifically defines electronic communication, and then it includes in that email, texting, as electronic communication. And the statute says that nothing in the Open and Public Meetings Act shall be construed in any way to say that electronic communication between the board members is a violation of the Act. So, back in the old days, before they amended the statute that way, before Facebook was created, before texting was so popular, it was easy for me to say, look, if you all get on the telephone in a conference call, you have convened and you are deliberating and you're cheating. It was also easy for me to say, but if you call John and say, this is how I feel, what do you feel? You're not cheating. There is no quorum. It's two of you discussing. You're politicking. You're deciding. And, you know, I shut that off and it came on automatically. And then if John calls Ned and says, I just had a discussion, and there's only two on, I can't say that you're convened. I can't say you're cheating. That was easy. You could draw clear lines. But if you all got on the conference call, you were clearly cheating. And then email came along, became popular, and people would say, what about if I email everybody? Well, I can't say that's cheating. What about if we're all sitting at our computer and we're emailing in immediately, right back and forth, and everybody's getting it, or we're texting right now? I used to train that appears to me to be absolutely a meeting and that you're deliberating and deciding. But the statute says that electronic communication is not necessarily a violation of the Act. I will tell you that you are cheating if you're all on some text messaging board at the same time or email at the same time or are having a back and forth discussion in real time about the issue and how you're going to vote and there's a quorum present. I will also tell you that I don't think it's cheating if you get on Facebook, for example, on those forums. How much more transparent and public is that? You know, everybody in town could be on it with you. So you will know when you draw the line. You will know if you're cheating. But it is not a violation of the Open and Public Meetings Act for you to email everybody on the town council or the city council and say, we're crazy if we do this. Or it's not a violation if you send everybody a text message during the middle of the week that says, I'm voting no and you're not going to change my mind. And they text you back and say, what could we do to change your mind? And that's not cheating. But it's getting close. Did that answer your question? Yes. It seems like it's cheating to me too, but I don't think it's technically a violation of the Act anymore. And by the way, you're going to get caught of it. I've been training on this and teaching on this kind of stuff for so many years. I tell the same stories. I've got no new ones. I can barely remember anything anymore. I'm aging faster than anybody else in the room. Some of you have been here a long time, by the way. But and so I decided this morning when I came up that I'm not going to feel bad about retelling the same stories and using the same examples, because maybe everybody else has forgotten I've told them. But back in the when I first became a city attorney, one of my first clients that I went to all the city meetings with was Riverton City, a very nice city, lovely place to represent, very rural and small town at the time. Back in 1980 or that. I don't see anybody from Riverton here, are they? But they had a restaurant in town called La Fonda's there. And before every city council meeting, the council met and had, something at La Fonda's. And when you came to the meeting, it was clear how efficient that worked. You didn't waste time on long discussions. You knew what was going to happen. It was also very clear to the members of the public present. Some tough issues, somebody raises their hand, I move we do it for the reasons previously discussed, and they say, okay, all aye. And somebody says, when previously discussed? And then somebody say, oh yeah, at dinner, Now, that's changed over the years. We don't do that as much anymore. It's clear now that no matter what we call it, a work meeting, another meeting, they're all public meetings, no matter what you call them. The same rules apply to every meeting. The location doesn't matter. It's a meeting. It's subject to the Open and Public Meetings Act. And I know it's difficult for people to avoid that, but remember, we voluntarily got into this. You voluntarily ran for election. It's like going to the beach and refusing to wear the swimming suit. You don't go to the beach in the muumuu. If you feel like you need to wear a muumuu, don't go to the beach. Okay, we know what a meeting is, we know what a quorum is, we know what a public body is. Once you get that far, it's easy to comply with the Open and Public Meetings Act. It's a low standard of compliance. It's not hard. All we have to do is this. You give proper notice of your meeting, and you open the doors of the meeting room to the public. Notice means at least 24 hours before the meeting, you create an agenda, call of the meeting. It's got the date, time, and place of the meeting on it, a list of what you intend to discuss or consider on it. You post that on the state public meeting website. You post it at the place of the meeting. You send a copy of that to your news media outlets who are interested. You don't have to pay them to publish it. You send it to them, and you've complied then with the notice requirements. Then all you have to do is allow the public to come in and watch you meet. You don't have to allow them to participate in the meeting. You don't have to allow them to disrupt the meeting. You don't have to allow them to do anything but sit and stare at you the way you're doing me. You don't even have to ask them questions or let them interrupt you. That's all up to you on your own rules and policies and procedures. Now, some of your meetings at some times will be required public hearings. When you have a required public hearing, that portion of the meeting, you've got to let the public participate. But at a public meeting, you don't have to let the public participate. It's still your meeting. It's not the public's meeting to hijack. I think that kind of misunderstanding is what drives us to hold these secret meetings and deliberate in secret, because either we haven't established good enough rules of procedure or good enough customs or practice or procedure to keep the public from disrupting us, or we're not self-disciplined enough to run good, tight meetings in public where we feel like we can get things done efficiently. A good example to me, by the way, I think on this is the legislature on how they do it. For this, they're very formal, obviously, those of you who've been there. But in the legislative process, you have committee hearings on bills. They are public hearings. Members of the public and invited experts will be invited to present or allowed to present on these bills. That's the public hearing process. Now, any of you who've ever been there know that the legislature doesn't let those run on forever. There's a set amount of time allotted. There are rules. The public has their input. They're done. If there's more public input, that committee decides if they want to hear any more, and when they're done, they're done. Some of them are very long, some of them are very short, but it meets the committee requirement, the public hearing requirement. And then when the legislature meets and deliberates, the public gets to sit up in those galleries if you've been there. But at no time does any member of the public get to raise their hand and interrupt the debate and make a comment. If they do, they get ushered out. The legislature, the body, discusses and deliberates and votes. So you have the public process and the very formal public deliberation and deciding process, and it's efficient. We can do the same things in our meetings and make them efficient, and that helps us avoid this temptation to try to do things in secret, to try to avoid the big, mean public meetings that we can sometimes have and that kind of thing. But it's just a matter of rules and functions. So to meet the requirements of the Open and Public Meetings Act, you need notice, you need to let the public come in. The other thing that the Act is very clear about is that you may not take final action on any matter that is not on your agenda. You can have classifications on your agenda. You can have things like other business. You can have things like past business. You can have things like public comment. The key on those is you just can't take any final action on any item in any of those things. Why you have them, that'll be up to you, you know. But if it's not clearly on the agenda, you can't take final action. Yes. Okay, his question is, if you just have an item on an agenda and it's described by whoever put the agenda as discuss something, can you then take action on it? Well, to me, that a lot depends on your past policies, practices, and procedures. If you had, for example, on your agenda item, a lot of items that says discuss, and then underneath it says decide, and then discuss, and then decide, and then you get to the next item and it says discuss, and there's no decide listed after, you're giving the impression to the public that our policies and procedures and what we're going to do on that is not decide tonight, we're only going to discuss. And I think somebody who challenged you on that might say, hey, I would have come if I'd have known they were going to make a decision. I thought they were just going to discuss. But let's say your agendas for under your rules and your procedures always just have the item listed. Maybe it says ordinance number such and such, ordinance resolution such and such, and it doesn't say discuss or decide. I think you get there, you can discuss or decide. You're not misleading, you're not doing anything. But it is a close thing. Well-written agenda helps you. It's limiting in some respects, but once again, you will know if you're trying to sneak something by somebody. And so will they in the end. Yes, his question is about the item on the agenda for public comment. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. Back in the old days, back when we had larger vocabularies and fancier agendas, very often you used to see a thing that is called public petitions and remonstrances. Now, if you put that on, nobody would know what to do with it. You know, they wouldn't know how to remonstrate. So now we just put public comment. That's very common, very nice. It's helpful, and the public is used to it. It's not a bad thing to do. The thing to remember, though, is if someone brings up something in public comment that requires final action of the body, legislative action, policy action, and it's not on the agenda, you're going to have to tell them, we'll put that on a future agenda and take care of it. Now, if someone brings up something in public comment that doesn't require action of the public body, it's not legislative action, it's not policy-making action, it's just an administrative kind of thing. For example, they show up and they say, hey, there's a big pothole in front of my house. You say to them, we'll take care of that. You don't say to them, let's put that on the next agenda. We can't take any final action on that today. There's a distinction of that, if you can see. Okay, we've got the notice. We invite them in. They get to watch us work. What the Open and Public Meetings Act also does is it tells us what kind of records we have to keep of all public meetings. All public meetings of all public bodies are required to be recorded, with a minor exception that I'm going to talk about in a minute. All public meetings of all public bodies are required to have written minutes. And what the minutes include is a requirement of the Act. The Act says that the minutes must include the date, time, place where the meeting's held, the names of the members present, and the substance, not a transcription, but the substance of what each member might say, and the actual vote by name of each member on any item. So even if you don't have a roll call vote on an item, some items under the law require roll call votes, some items don't. But if you take a vote, even if it's not a roll call vote, your minute keeper needs to indicate in the written minutes who voted which way. Now, if the chair of the meeting allows a member of the public to speak, the minutes have to include the name of that member of the public and the substance of what they said. Now, the reason why that's in there is because some member of the public, this shows you the world we live in. Some member of the public attended some public meeting at some city council at some time, said something in the public comments, didn't like the way the minutes came out because it didn't reflect accurately what he said or she said. So they went and complained to the state legislature, and the state legislature said, oh, well, I'll fix that, and amended the Open and Public Meetings Act to say that your minutes have to include the names of the speakers and the substance of what they said. So you can't just say members of the public spoke, because this guy showed up and spoke and wanted it in the record. The law also allows a member of the public body to insist that anything else that is a record of what occurred at the meeting be included in the minutes. So if your recorder, for example, is not doing a full transcription, but is just doing the substance of what they say, and the member reads the minutes and says, you know, that may be a fair summary of what I said, but I thought the way I said it came out lots better than that. You know, you've turned me from high literature into pulp fiction. I want my exact words. That member has the right to have that in the minutes, regardless of what the other members of the council may think or the recorder may think. The public doesn't necessarily have that right. So your minutes have the minimal amount, need to reflect that. Your recording is required to be a recording, complete recording from start to finish. All minutes, all recordings are documents that are governed by grandma. They're public documents. Some portions of the minutes, when we get to the closed meeting, can be protected and don't need to be made public in the same way, but they're all official records and documents. However, the official record of the meeting is your written minutes, not the recording, still under the statute. The statute requires that for your legislative bodies, that your pending minutes, as they're defined, your draft minutes, be done within 30 days from your meeting. For your planning commissions, your other bodies, you don't have to do it that fast. You are required to have a system for approving your draft minutes. Once they become approved minutes, They have to be available to the public and posted on the state meeting website within 3 days from their approval. You can have any process you want for turning pending minutes into approved minutes, as long as your pending minutes are done within 30 days. Your pending minutes are public documents, public records. As soon as they're done and are available to the body as draft minutes, they're available to the public. Any questions about that? Yes, way in the back. Tell them if they're uncomfortable, don't stand up and speak. We're uncomfortable and we're doing it. Yeah. The names of each person who is not a member and after being recognized speaks. It doesn't say address. So, no, and I do appreciate the privacy thing. Let me just say this. Privacy is a big issue, you know, but now that we're live streaming things, now that everything's on site, recordings are posted, everything like that, I hope it turns the public into less of a mob, and I hope it turns the council members into more of politicians. Remember, you're being recorded. And I have listened, I go to a lot of city council meetings and speak all the time on things, and I've listened to what I've said, and I'm an idiot. I sound terrible. I'm not going to talk as much. I urge all of you to listen to your recordings, especially after a long meeting, and I think you'll find that you become lots more circumspect and choose your words more better when you speak, because we don't look good on those recordings. The minutes we can clean up. I don't know, I have always done that. But the point is, well, yeah, the public gets up, they speak, they get angry, and then they're angrier because they discover 2 or 3 weeks later that there's no way to get rid of that recording when they're making a idiot of themselves in public. So it is kind of a harsh kind of result. Yes, Mayor. Town hall meetings. The mayor of Richfield asked about town hall meetings. If the council calls, the town hall is not a public body. The town is not a public body. But if what you mean by a town hall meeting is that the mayor and council convene a meeting and make it a big public hearing of the whole town hall, it's a public meeting. You're going to record it. You're going to have minutes, and you're going to follow every rule just the same way. It's just more people at the same meeting. All right, closed meetings. All of your meetings start as open and public meetings. There is no exception. Every meeting starts as an open and public meeting. Some portions of your open and public meeting may be closed for some very specific reasons, following some very specific processes. In order to close a portion of your meeting, you need somebody to make a motion to close the portion. They need to state the purpose for which the meeting's being closed. You need a 2/3 vote of the members present to close the meeting. You need a roll call vote. Your minutes need to indicate in that meeting what the purpose for which it was closed and who voted for and against closing the meeting. Now, the purposes for which you can close a meeting are specifically listed in the state statute. These are not meant to be descriptive of things. They are meant to be the things. It's not these things and things like unto them. It is only these things. If it's not on the list, you can't close the meeting to discuss it. The statute says that we can close a meeting to talk about the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual. For a lot of years, we used to say you could close a meeting to talk about personnel issues. That's not true. That led us into a trap. We can close a meeting to talk about a person. You can't close a meeting to talk about should we give the employees a merit increase this year. You can't close a meeting to say should we adopt a new personnel policy. We can't close a meeting to talk about which employees we're going to define as exempt and which we're going to define as salaried and subject to overtime. You get to close a meeting to talk about that guy, not all of them. You get to close a meeting to talk about strategy on collective bargaining. We don't bargain collectively, as far as I know. I guess Salt Lake may, maybe Ogden does, maybe Midvale used to, I don't know. We get to close them. Does Provo bargain collectively?
I can't even spell that.
Utah County, they don't bargain collectively. They are a collective. They're just part of the hive. We can close a meeting to talk about strategy sessions regarding pending or reasonably imminent litigation. This is abused a lot, by the way. This means you're meeting with your lawyer about something, or you're preparing to meet with your lawyer about something that's actually happened. It doesn't mean someone says in a meeting, if you do this, I'm going to sue you, and you say, oh, then before we decide, let's close the meeting and discuss this. That's not pending litigation. That's not imminent litigation. You at least ought to have the notice of claim or the complaint or the threatening letter or something. It's strategy on the litigation. It's not, we close the meeting to see if, how to make this tough decision. You can close a meeting to discuss strategy regarding the purchase, sale, exchange, lease, etc. of real property, water rights, when you're doing that so that you don't disclose your bottom line prices. Not to discuss should we sell the property or should we buy property. You close it after you've made that decision that you're going to sell or buy to talk about what's our offer, what's the amount. Should we offer more? Should we offer less? What's our bottom line? You can close a meeting to discuss the deployment of security devices, and you can close a meeting to discuss ongoing criminal investigations. There are other things in the statute that don't apply to us. If it's not on that list I just gave, you can't close the meeting. So the previous question, can we talk about a contract? Well, it depends. If the contract is a settlement agreement with some litigation, yes. If the contract is dealing with the purchase or sale of property, then perhaps. If the contract is on dealing with something else, then perhaps not. It depends on the subject matter of the contract. Yes, sir. Really a good question he asked. Does it have to say on the agenda, closed meeting? I hear lots of people who train on this, lots of recorders who say it has to be on the agenda, closed meeting. I don't think the law requires that. I think the law allows you to close a portion of the meeting if the topic is appropriately on the agenda and the need arises and the need is appropriate and the vote is taken. But a lot of the recorders and a lot of other people say it needs to say possible closed meeting, so you see those agendas that have it on all the time. But my example is this. Let's say you've got on the you get to the meeting, you've got an agenda item number 3, renew the contract with David Church to be city attorney. Mayor's put it on, no problem. You get to item number 3 and it says renew the contract with David Church for city attorney, and a council member raises his hand and says, before we vote on this, there's some things I want to discuss, and I think it'd be appropriate for me to discuss this with you in a closed setting. I move we close it to talk about the character and competence of David Church. And you get a 2/3 vote to do that. You go into the closed meeting, they discuss it. They come out of the closed meeting, and then they vote on whether to renew the contract or not renew the contract. To me, that is what the intention of the law is there. The fact that nobody put on the agenda potential closed meeting because no one anticipated that a council member had something to say that would be appropriately said in private wasn't anticipated, didn't come up. That's the appropriate way to do it. Now, when you know that a closed meeting is going to happen, you put it on the agenda that it's a potential closed meeting. If you plan to discuss some strategy thing or plan to discuss some litigation, then it's appropriate. And I don't think there's any harm in just having the same thing on the closed possible closed meeting at the bottom of every agenda. I see that all the time. It's, what can I say? It's all right with me if they have it on there as long as they don't hold them all the time. Closed meetings should be rare. If you're holding a lot of them, you're cheating. Planning commissioners, in my mind, should never be holding closed meetings. I can't find anything on this that would involve a planning commission. Perhaps they're getting sued, perhaps they're meeting with their lawyer, but that ought to be rare. Yes, sir.
Do you have to close your meeting in public, or do you do it in a closed session?
You start from a public meeting. All meetings are public until they're voted on to be closed. There is no way to start in closed meeting.
You can adjourn from the closed session?
Pardon?
You adjourn from the closed session?
Well, you need something to close your open meeting. So let's say you all leave, the recorder's going to say meeting was adjourned by lack of a quorum. It doesn't matter if you go out and vote to adjourn. You're gone. They're going to close the meeting. So I don't think that matters, but it comes up all the time. Oh, we got to open up and go back into open session so we can vote to adjourn. Well, that's nice. It helps the recorder. It helps the recording. It adds kind of bookends. But if you didn't do that and you just all walked out, your recorder is going to indicate something that says closed meeting ended, everybody left, open meeting's over for lack of a quorum or something like that. Yes, sir.
In the planning commission or in a city council meeting, if somebody starts discussing litigation with you, can you curb that discussion
Yeah.
and shut it down?
Depending on who you are. If you're the chairman of the meeting, you can curb all of them you want to curb. Yeah. If it's not on the agenda, and let me just say, I'm in favor of strong chairs. There's a lot of mayors here. I am in favor of the mayors asserting the little authority that the statute gives them that the council can't take from them. And one of those things is chair of the body. I'm in favor of mayors wielding a heavy gavel, moving meetings along, cutting off discussion when it's gone too far, keeping to the agenda, and getting it done. And I will tell you, the public appreciates it. Now, the one member of the public that you may cut off and say, we've heard what you've said, we understand, you've had your time, may not like it at the time, but everybody else sitting there listening will appreciate it. Council members need to allow their chairs to regulate, moderate, and control the meeting, even when they're controlling your own conduct. It's good for the body politic. More formal is better than less formal. The public will treat you with more respect if you treat each other with respect and if your meetings have some formality. The less formal you get, it's up to you. You can be less formal if you want. You can hold just things that are like town halls, public committee meetings, open debates. But in my experience, it's inefficient and it leads to hard feelings, and you can never bring it back under control once you get those bad habits and customs. Okay, all closed meetings have to be recorded except closed meetings that deal with discussion of personnel or deployment of security devices. You can opt out of those if you want and just have an affidavit. The recording of a closed meeting is not a public document, but is subject to review by the courts. And if a court determines that you cheated, they'll disclose whatever you talked about in that closed session to the public. Was there a question over here I missed? His question is it inappropriate to adjourn the other meeting and go into a closed meeting so you can send the recorder home? The question will be why are you sending the recorder home? Somebody's got to record the closed meeting. Unless the recorder is who you're talking about or doesn't want the litigation, the statute says your recorder will attend all meetings of the public body. Doesn't mean you can't force them out if there's a reason, but yeah. I mean, you can do it if you want, I guess, but yes. Well, let's out you. What city are you from? Ivans, huh? I think no, roll call vote just means that the chair calls the roll and asks for a yes or no. All right, somebody says, I move we close the meeting to talk about a person's character competence. And somebody else says, I second that. And then the chair says, Council Member A, how do you vote? And they say, yes or no. Council Member B, how do you vote? Yes or no. What you don't do is you want to say, all of you in favor say aye, and all opposed say no. That's not a roll call vote. Now, your recorder will probably politely fix it all for you by in your minutes showing that everybody's votes one way or the other, but the statute says roll call. No problem. Any other questions about closed meetings? Yes. Yeah, that's kind of happens a lot. It's not really an open meetings question, but I'm happy to answer it because
Exactly what is an abstinence? Is that a no vote? Is that a non-vote? What is it?
really a good question, Mayor. We are required by the law to adopt a set of rules procedure for our meetings. Those rules and procedure can be whatever you want them to be, but we're required to have them. They can be as formal as Robert's Rules of Order or as informal as you want to make your rules of procedure. Theoretically, in your rules of procedure, you might address that, how an absence is treated, how a refusal to vote is treated. In the absence of you covering that in your rules of procedure, there are some minimum rules put on you by state law. Those are these. First, there is a minimum vote requirement in a city of the 6th and the 5th class to pass anything. That minimum requirement is 3 yes votes. So if you have 5 members present, 2 vote yes, 2 vote no, and 1 person says, I abstain, the result of that vote is it does not pass. And so in that instance, that abstention's the equivalent of a no vote because there were not 3 yes votes. Now, if you had 5 members present and 4 vote yes and 1 says I abstain, the item passes. You had 3 yes votes. No one cares what that abstention means. Now, a difficult issue is cities that operate under the 6-member council form of government. Mayor can vote in case of a tie. 5 council members present, 1 mayor. 3 council members vote yes, or vote, 2 council members vote yes, 2 council members vote no, 5th council member says, I abstain. Is that a tie allowing the mayor to vote? And give the third thing. My opinion on that is if the council member's present and abstains, it is not a tie. The mayor can't vote. Now, if that council member stands up and walks out of the room, it is a tie. He's not present. I count that as an absence and not a no vote at all, and the mayor could vote. But you could cover that by your rules. I have written rules for cities that basically say, if a member is present, then his vote or her vote when they abstain will be treated like a no vote for purposes of calculating the tie. You could write it the other way if you wanted. You could say that the vote is treated like they're absent for purposes of determining the tie. The issue that I have is not that the people who vote because they don't understand it, but the cowards that vote to force the mayor to take a position. I've been in city council meetings where they know which way the mayor's going and they don't want to take the blame. So they abstain to force the mayor to be the third vote.
Dave.
Yes. Okay, his question is if I want to abstain so that there be more deliberation. That's another matter for the rules and the chair. Let's say under his scenario they can't, because of his abstention, they can't get a yes, get to 3. Either way, he wants to talk about it more. The chair in that case, unless the rule said otherwise, could say, we're done, it didn't pass, there weren't 3 yes votes, we're off. And if that council member wants more deliberation, he's going to have to find a way to get it back on the agenda to do it, or else say, wait a minute, I'm really in favor of it. But you could treat it like a no vote. Let me talk a little bit about this council relations as long as we're at the end of this. What time is it anyway?
9 o'clock.
Okay. This is a big issue for me, by the way, because of some meetings that I've watched lately. You guys are all great people. Quit trying to get along with each other so much. There comes a point in time in every meeting where everybody in the place knows how the issue is going to be decided. And yet we still keep talking it over to try to convince that last guy. You don't have to convert and baptize them. You get to vote against them. You get to just move on. And those of you who are in the minority on those things, when you see that it is 4-1 against or 3-2 against, and you've had your say, just step back and say, thanks for letting me have the say, let's get this going. But we just spend hours and hours of trying to bring everybody to consensus. We're not about consensus, we're about decisions. We deliberate and we decide. We don't have to convert everybody to our way of thinking, nor do you have to compromise the majority's position just to get the minority to come along. Just ask Neil Gorsuch today, you know, he's going to be voted in Supreme Court. You know, it's going to be 52-48. They didn't have to reach consensus. Your meetings will go better and faster if every once in a while you just say, thanks for your input, but I'm right and you're not, I'm voting. Like I said once before, everybody's entitled to get their say, just not everybody's entitled to get their way. There will be some losers. That's what I've got on the Open and Public Meetings Act. Let me just add one other thing and answer any other questions you've got on anything specific. One of the things that we learned yesterday in the legislative update is that today, or this year, you're less powerful than you were last year this time. The legislature has taken away some of your options, some of your things. But I just wanted to tell you, you're not less important. We have to always keep in mind, it gets so discouraging. We see these reports about what the legislature says we can and we can't do. Most of those go with our power, our ability to regulate. We have to always keep in mind our primary functions. We are the government that provides service. We're the people that bring clean water to the houses and take the dirty water away. When it storms, we divert the floodwaters away from the houses. We plow the roads. We sweep the roads. We build the roads. We quiet barking dogs. No matter what the legislature has done, we're still expected to do that, and we're the ones that are going to have to do it. I can tell you that if your constituents tomorrow went to their legislator and said, North Salt Lake's not doing a good job on the snow plowing, their response would be they'll pass a bill requiring us to snow plow better. They wouldn't plow any snow. We're the ones doing the work, and you should be proud of that. That's what we should primarily be focused on. The fact that we can or cannot regulate food trucks better or worse isn't as important as, are we bringing good water to their houses? When they call 911, do we get good response time? Does the fire department function? And the second thing we do that the legislature can't do for them and they can't take away from us is we're the ones that build a sense of community and preserve the sense of community. Richfield is a wonderful hometown because of what this good mayor does now and what every mayor did before him and every council. My father, I've said this before, I'm going to go, when we're done with this, over to Panguitch and visit my father. I was raised in Murray. My father was born in Panguitch. When he retired from the school business in Murray some 30 years ago now, he moved home to Panguitch. Why did he? Because it was his hometown. People protected and preserved and built and preserved that sense of community. Everybody needs a place to be from and a place to go home to. That's what we do. We shouldn't worry so much about whether the legislature lets us have big lots or small lots or whether we can regulate home occupations or not regulate. That's important. I mean, we want to do that. We think we can make our communities better if they give us more reins. But the primary thing that you do and do so well is we provide service, and we build hometowns. Keep doing that. Focus on that. That's what's really important. Don't get caught up in regulating, passing laws, doing things. Now, we're going to tax, we're going to spend, we're going to set rates, but what we're going to do is when I turn on the water in the morning in St. George and brush my teeth, I'm going to do that with confidence because Gary Esplin and Mayor Pike can make it happen. And when I go home to South Jordan, I'm going to flush a toilet and do that with confidence because that mayor and that council makes that happen. And when I have a problem and call 911, I'm going to do it in confidence because people like you make that happen. Not what the legislature does, not what others do. That's what we need to concentrate on, and that's why I'm most proud of representing you guys and working with you guys, because you're the ones that do it. And without you, nobody would, and if you didn't do it, they just order you to, because it needs to be done. Do you have any other questions? I'm happy to answer them. Thank you for your participation. Yes, sir.
You didn't say very much about public hearings.
Yes.
The public hearing can be restricted.
Yes.
Speaking to the subject.
Yes. Now, let me just say this on public hearings. There's two questions there. You may have rules to govern your public hearings. They will deal with time, manner, and place. They will never deal with content. So you're holding a public hearing on a hot zoning dispute. You're going to have rules that say, all right, we're going to call you up one at a time. You're going to talk from this space right here into the microphone. You're going to give us your name. Today we're talking about the zoning issue on the South 40. Everybody gets no more than 3 minutes. I've got the timer right here. It's your time. Go. And a man walks up and says, I'm here about the dog issue. And you politely remind them that says, we're on the public hearing on the zoning. Can we keep it to that topic? And he says, no, it's a public hearing. I'm here about the dog issue. I advise you to give him his 3 minutes and go on. Sometimes it's clear they're not talking on the topic. Sometimes it's clear they're beating you up, but we never regulate content. You give them a forum, you regulate time, manner of speech, and the place of their speech, but never their content. If they get rude, get angry, that's manner, but never content. Does that answer your questions? Yes.
What about enforcing the 2 or 3 minutes?
A good chair will enforce it, a bad chair won't. It's enforceable. Do it. If your council wants to waive the rules, they can be the ones that waive the rules and say give them more time. But the chair's job is to run the meeting according to the rules. The council's job is to adopt good rules in advance and empower the chair. And if a council member wants to say, Mr. Chair, this person's beyond the rules, I urge you to enforce it, that's fine for a council member to say. If the majority of the council then says, Mayor, I move we suspend these rules and let this wise man continue to speak for the next hour, then that's fine too. Yes, any other questions? Yes. The statute says that your city recorder will attend all meetings of the city council. If you're going to boot your city recorder out of the meeting, you ought to have a good reason to do it. There's a city recorder sitting right there chewing her gum harder and harder as you ask the question. They defend their territory vigorously. They're a public official. They're in charge of the records. They want to be there, make sure you do it right. And so unless you've got a good reason to give them the boot, you don't give them the boot. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You say they're a public official. All we have is contract reports.
Well, it doesn't matter if they're employees or contracts. The recorder is an officer of the city. You've got a minimum number. Which city are you from, Mike? Centerville has a minimum number of officers. They include, obviously, mayor, council, treasurer, recorder. You've got at least those public offices in every city. Towns, you've got clerks. Any other questions on anything else you want to talk about? Thank you. Yes. Rock climbing. No, I don't know anything about it.
Closed meeting, semi-annual evaluations of your city manager.
If you're talking about his character competency, that's fine. And by the way, let me just say there are certain things you cannot do in a closed meeting that are coming up. We ought to get the legislature to change this. They're stupid. But one of the things you cannot do in a closed meeting is interview candidates for positions on the mayor and council when there's a vacancy. That was put in solely because somebody complained that they didn't get the council appointment in Orem or South Jordan or both, and they didn't even get an interview. So now the law says you can't even interview those guys in a closed session. And the law says you have to interview everybody in the public meeting who applies for those, which is also stupid. You get 10 people who apply and you got to give them all a shot at you. Well, you know who you're going to vote for. I mean, it's just embarrassing to the others. But we don't, apparently it's now in the law and we never take anything out once it gets in. It's worse than headstones. Yeah, it's carved forever. Yes. When you say we, do you mean you? Individually, you can talk to them, but you can't get together as a group and talk to them openly. Remember, the meeting restrictions are a restriction on the public body, not a restriction on you as a person. You can talk and say whatever you want as a person. As a public body, you're restricted by the Open and Public Meetings Act. Yes?
Address ex parte communication between planning commission members and staff.
Okay, the question is ex parte communications, particularly with planning commissions and staff. You hear a lot of talk about ex parte communications. To me, as a semi-trained lawyer, an ex parte communication means a communication where only one party to a dispute is present. There's nothing wrong with a staff member talking with an individual planning commission member, or a planning commission member talking to individuals in the community, or planning commissions talking with individuals on the council, or council talking to individuals. What is wrong is if you have a decision that has two sides, an applicant and an opponent, and it starts to appear like there's an adversarial kind of thing, and the decision-making body, members of the decision-making body, then begin to have discussions with one side that the other side isn't participating in. That's when this ex parte, in my opinion, is inappropriate. You're denying people due process, a fair hearing, their say. So let's say you've got a neighborhood group and a developer. I guarantee, and they're at odds about something, I guarantee that if individual members of a planning commission are meeting with either of those sides in private before the public meeting or the public hearing on their issue, there's going to be an allegation that there's inappropriate ex parte communications. And it may very well be, and somebody's going to say they didn't get good process or due process. But if it's just a planning commissioner communicating with the council member, or planning commissioner communicating with staff member, asking questions, getting information, there's nothing wrong with that. Yes. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that, but I'm just saying, what you have to avoid is this. If you are the decision maker and you've got a contested issue that's formally contested by two sides, you want to avoid communication with one side where the other's not present. But that's a rare thing in our planning world. You know, it doesn't happen a lot. It does happen on issues like, you know, appeals of conditional uses, things like that, appeals of planning decisions. But that's where the ex parte communication becomes important, where one side has access and an advantage that the other side doesn't have. Any other questions? Thanks for your attendance. Pick up your certificate if you want them. Go your way if you don't.